You ever wake up and realize your neighbors are stealing sunlight off your roof? The sound hit first. Metal scraping against shingles. Boots dragging across my roof at 4:52 in the morning. For half a second, I thought a tree branch had come loose in the windstorm rolling through Willow Creek Estates. Then came the sharp electronic chirp from my inverter system downstairs. One warning beep. Then another. Then silence. The kind of silence that makes your stomach tighten before your brain catches up. I rolled out of bed, and my bare feet hit cold hardwood just as the hallway lights flickered and died. The house went dark except for the faint blue glow of rain outside my bedroom window. The air conditioner shut off mid-cycle, leaving behind that strange humming emptiness every homeowner recognizes immediately. Power outage. But the neighborhood outside still had lights. Porch lamps glowed through the rain. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement. Only my house went black. That's when I smelled it. Burnt insulation. Hot copper. The scent drifted through the open upstairs window like overheated electronics and wet asphalt. I pulled the blinds aside and felt my pulse slam straight into my throat. 3 men in reflective contractor jackets were standing on my roof disconnecting my solar panels one by one while a white utility trailer sat backed into my driveway. Rainwater dripped off the aluminum frames as they stacked the panels like stolen televisions. And standing below them, perfectly dry beneath a massive black umbrella, was Linda Carrington, HOA president, 53 years old, white Range Rover, permanent smile sharp enough to cut glass. She stood there with a clipboard pressed against her chest like she was supervising landscaping work instead of dismantling $38,000 of equipment off my house before sunrise. The glow from the trailer lights reflected off her pearl-colored raincoat while she pointed up toward my roof and said, "Take the entire south side first. Those are the non-compliant units." Non-compliant units. That's what she called the system my father and I spent 8 weekends installing together before the chemo got too hard on his lungs. My chest tightened so fast it hurt. I threw on jeans and sprinted downstairs 2 steps at a time when another sound ripped through the darkness upstairs. "Dad," Chloe's voice. Panicked. My 15-year-old daughter stood in the kitchen holding her insulin case against her chest while the refrigerator alarm screamed into the dark house. The backup cooler had already shut off. Tiny red warning light blinking. The metallic taste of adrenaline hit the back of my tongue instantly. Linda didn't just cut power to my solar array. She cut power to medical refrigeration inside my home during a storm. I yanked open the front door so hard it slammed against the siding and rain exploded across my face. Linda slowly turned toward me with that same fake suburban smile she used during HOA meetings right before fining people over mailbox paint. "Good morning, Ethan," she said calmly. "The board voted to remove unauthorized energy structures due to neighborhood complaints." Unauthorized. I looked past her toward the roof where one of the contractors disconnected another panel and my entire monitoring system chirped again like a dying heartbeat. Then I looked at the security camera mounted under my garage soffit. Still recording. Every second. Every face. Every word. And what Linda Carrington didn't understand yet was that my father spent 22 years as a state utility compliance inspector before he died. Which meant I knew exactly how expensive this mistake was about to become for every single person standing in my driveway. The rain kept hammering the roof long after the contractors left, but the silence inside my house felt worse. No inverter hum. No refrigerator compressor cycling on. Just the soft ticking of cooling pipes in the walls and Chloe sitting at the kitchen table wrapped in a blanket while I connected a backup battery pack to her insulin cooler. The tiny green light flickered back to life, and I finally exhaled for the first time in 20 minutes. The smell of wet drywall and burnt wiring still lingered in the air. Outside, Willow Creek looked perfect as always. Sprinklers running on schedule. Porch lights glowing warm against expensive stone facades. Neighbors peeking through curtains pretending not to watch the HOA president strip a man's roof before sunrise. That was the thing about this neighborhood. Everybody loved order until they realized order came with people like Linda Carrington attached to it. I stood in the garage staring at the empty mounts bolted into my roofline while rainwater dripped through the disconnected conduit pipes. Those panels were never about being trendy or saving the planet. They were my father's last real project. Frank Mercer spent 22 years crawling through utility sites across Texas inspecting electrical compliance systems for the State Energy Commission. My old man believed in doing things right the first time. Every wire labeled, every permit documented, every bolt torqued exactly to spec. He used to say sloppy electrical work was like lying. Eventually, it burned somebody. The last summer before the cancer took him, we spent every Saturday on that roof together. 100-degree heat, sweat running down our backs, the smell of asphalt shingles cooking under the sun while classic rock played through a dusty radio in the garage. He could barely lift half the equipment near the end, but he still climbed the ladder every morning with a coffee thermos in one hand and a voltage tester clipped to his belt. Chloe used to sit cross-legged in the driveway handing us tools while pretending she understood electrical diagrams. Dad loved that. Said she had steadier hands than most apprentices he trained. The whole system became something bigger than power bills after that. It was proof that something good could survive after a bad year. After the divorce. After hospital rooms. After funeral paperwork. And Linda knew exactly what those panels meant to me because she made them her obsession the second they went up. The first violation notice arrived 3 days after final inspection approval. Reflective surface nuisance. Then came another one. Non-approved exterior modification. Then community aesthetic disruption. Every letter smelled like fresh printer ink and cheap perfume because Linda hand-delivered them herself like she enjoyed the ritual. During one HOA meeting, she actually stood in front of 30 homeowners holding printed photos of my roof like she was presenting evidence in a murder trial. This neighborhood was designed to preserve traditional architectural harmony, she said while pointing at my panels with manicured fingernails. Traditional architectural harmony. Meanwhile, half the neighborhood had artificial turf, 3-car garages, and Christmas decorations bright enough to guide aircraft. But apparently sunlight was the threat. I remember sitting there in that freezing clubhouse listening to her voice bounce off the walls while Chloe squeezed my arm under the table, trying to keep me calm. Linda smiled at me the entire time. Not angry, not emotional. Worse, confident. Like somebody who had spent years learning exactly how far she could push ordinary people before they gave up. And maybe most people did. But what Linda Carrington never understood about my family was that we documented everything. Every permit sat filed in waterproof binders inside my office cabinet. Every inspection report scanned into cloud storage. Every contractor invoice dated and signed. My father trusted paperwork more than promises. Turns out that habit was about to save me. By noon, the rain had stopped, but the damage sat on my house like missing teeth. Empty mounting brackets lined the south side of the roof, where 24 solar panels used to catch morning sunlight. Water dripped steadily through exposed conduit holes into the attic insulation, and every few seconds my disconnected inverter emitted another weak electronic chirp before shutting itself down again. Chloe sat on the living room floor, charging her phone from the emergency battery station, while I spread paperwork across the kitchen counter like a crime scene investigator. Inspection certificates, utility approvals, HOA bylaws, printed emails. The sharp smell of coffee and wet paper filled the room, while thunder rolled far off across the hills outside Willow Creek. Most people think HOA presidents are just annoying retirees with clipboards and too much free time. Linda Carrington was different. Linda treated the neighborhood like a corporation and every homeowner like an employee one complaint away from termination. She had this polished realtor voice that always sounded calm, even when she was threatening someone's finances. You could hear it at every monthly HOA meeting echoing through the clubhouse beside the smell of burnt coffee and lemon furniture polish. Community standards protect property values, she loved saying while sliding violation notices across folding tables like casino cards. Nobody ever challenged her publicly because Linda never attacked people all at once. She worked slowly. One fine here, one warning there. One quiet rumor spread through the neighborhood Facebook page until homeowners got exhausted enough to comply. A retired Marine down the street got fined because his work trailer sat in his driveway 45 minutes past approved hours. A widow on Aspen Court received daily penalties over wind chimes Linda called excessive noise pollution. One family painted their shutters dark blue without approval and somehow ended up in mediation with HOA attorneys over color compliance violations. Everybody complained privately. Nobody fought back publicly. That was how Linda kept control. Fear wrapped in paperwork. And the craziest part was how much she enjoyed the performance. During meetings, she wore expensive cream-colored blazers like she was running for Congress instead of policing mailbox paint in suburban Texas. Her white Range Rover always smelled like vanilla perfume and leather cleaner whenever she stepped out carrying stacks of violation folders against her chest. Even the way she smiled felt rehearsed. Tight. Controlled. Like she practiced it in mirrors before board meetings. But the solar panels became personal. She started calling them industrial clutter during meetings. Claimed buyers had complained about glare even though my roof faced away from the street. She once stopped me while I was checking my mailbox and pointed toward my house with perfectly manicured nails. You know, Ethan, neighborhoods decline one compromise at a time. One compromise at a time. Like clean energy and lower electric bills were somehow signs of social collapse. I remember gripping my mailbox key so hard my knuckles hurt while she stood there smiling beneath the hum of cicadas and lawn sprinklers. The thing Linda hated most was not the panels themselves. It was what they represented. Independence. I was one of the only homeowners in Willow Creek whose electric bill dropped near zero every summer while the rest of the subdivision complained online about utility rate increases. During storm outages, my battery backup kept lights running while neighboring houses sat dark. That bothered her. People like Linda cannot stand systems they cannot control. Around 3 that afternoon, I finally opened the email attachment Linda sent right after the contractors left my roof. The subject line read Emergency Compliance Enforcement Action. Cold corporate language. But one sentence made my stomach tighten instantly. Removal was authorized unanimously by the HOA board under Emergency Property Preservation Powers. Unanimously authorized. I stared at that line while rainwater dripped somewhere inside my attic. Because I had attended every HOA meeting for 2 years. And there had never been a vote. The next morning, sunlight poured across my roof with nowhere to go. That was the part that bothered me most. Perfect clear Texas sky. Not a single cloud. And my house sat there dead silent while the rest of Willow Creek hummed with power. I stood in the driveway holding a cup of burnt coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier, staring at empty mounting rails still bolted into the shingles like scars. Every few minutes a neighbor slowed their car near my curb just long enough to look before driving away. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked questions. In HOA neighborhoods, people learn early that curiosity can become evidence. Around 9 o'clock, another violation notice hit my email inbox. I actually laughed when I opened it because the timing was so absurd it almost felt scripted. Property appearance degradation due to exposed roof hardware. Linda had removed my solar system and then fined me because the roof looked incomplete afterward. The woman was issuing penalties for damage she caused herself. The metallic taste of anger crept into the back of my mouth while I reread the notice standing in my kitchen beneath dead recessed lights. Then another email arrived. Mandatory hearing scheduled for Friday evening. Possible legal escalation for homeowner noncompliance. The air inside the house felt heavy and humid without full power circulation, and the faint smell of damp insulation from the attic still lingered overhead. Chloe sat at the dining table doing homework beside 3 battery packs and an emergency lantern while I hooked extension cords to a portable generator humming out in the garage. "Dad," she asked quietly without looking up from her notebook. "Why does she hate us so much?" That question stayed with me all day. Because honestly, I do not think Linda hated me personally at first. I think she hated what she could not manage. Solar panels meant lower utility dependence. Battery backup meant independence during outages. I worked in commercial electrical infrastructure. I understood permits better than half the contractors in the county. People like Linda survive on intimidation, and intimidation only works when the other person feels uncertain. By afternoon, the neighborhood Facebook page exploded with HOA updates. Linda posted professionally edited photos of my roof from street level with captions about preserving community standards and protecting long-term property values. She talked about visual harmony like she was defending national security instead of stealing clean energy equipment before dawn. The comments underneath divided the neighborhood exactly the way she wanted. Some homeowners praised the board for maintaining order. Others quietly asked whether removing installed property without a court order was legal. Those comments mysteriously disappeared within minutes. That evening, I drove to the clubhouse for the emergency hearing. The building smelled like carpet cleaner and stale coffee the second I walked inside. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, while board members sat behind folding tables pretending not to avoid eye contact. Linda sat in the center wearing a cream blazer with gold buttons, hands folded neatly atop a stack of violation folders. Calm, composed, like this was just another ordinary meeting. "Mr. Mercer," she said as I took my seat, "the board hopes you understand these actions were necessary for the aesthetic protection of the community." Necessary. I looked around the room at the same people who waved politely while walking dogs every evening. Retired accountants, insurance agents, a dentist, normal suburban homeowners who somehow convinced themselves this was acceptable because Linda spoke confidently enough. Then I noticed something strange. 3 board members looked nervous. One man kept adjusting his glasses without speaking. Another avoided looking at the paperwork in front of him entirely. And suddenly my father's voice echoed in my head, clear as a breaker snapping on. "If people are scared to look at documents, Ethan, the documents matter." That was when I stopped feeling angry. Angry people react. Calm people investigate. And sitting there beneath the cold fluorescent hum of that clubhouse, watching Linda smile across the table like she already won, I realized something important. She had spent months trying to scare me into backing down, which meant there was probably something she was terrified I would find. The hearing ended exactly the way Linda wanted it to. She talked for 40 straight minutes while the rest of the board nodded like dashboard ornaments. Community standards, emergency authority, structural concerns, property value preservation. Every sentence sounded polished enough to belong in a corporate training video. Meanwhile, I sat there listening to rainwater drip somewhere inside my attic through holes their contractors left behind. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly while stale air from the clubhouse vents carried the smell of burnt coffee and old carpet glue across the room. When Linda finally finished reading violation summaries, she folded her hands neatly and smiled at me across the table. "Mr. Mercer, if you cooperate, the board may reconsider future penalties." Cooperate. Like they had not dismantled my roof at sunrise without a court order. One of the board members, a guy named Richard Holloway, shifted uncomfortably beside her and cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should review whether all procedures were properly documented before escalating further." Linda's smile vanished for half a second. Tiny, barely noticeable, but I caught it. "The procedures were unanimous," she replied sharply, "as stated in the board authorization." Richard immediately looked down at the table. Nobody spoke after that. That silence told me more than anything else that night. I drove home with the windows cracked open, warm, humid air rolling through the truck, while cicadas screamed from the trees lining Willow Creek Boulevard. My headlights swept across rows of identical stone houses and perfectly trimmed lawns while the neighborhood sat glowing under steady electrical power. Except mine. My house looked hollow in the darkness at the end of the cul-de-sac. Generator humming faintly in the garage. Extension cords snaking across the floor. The whole place smelled like gasoline, damp drywall, and battery heat. Chloe was asleep on the couch with textbooks spread across her chest when I walked in. The emergency lantern beside her cast soft blue light across the room, while her insulin cooler hummed quietly from backup power. I stood there watching her sleep for a long minute, exhausted from stress she never should have carried in the first place. Then I walked into my office and shut the door. My father's old filing cabinet sat against the wall beside shelves full of electrical code books and permit binders. The metal drawer groaned open with that familiar scraping sound I had heard 1,000 times growing up. Dad used to say paperwork is like wiring behind drywall. Ugly until something catches fire. I started pulling documents one by one beneath the warm yellow glow of a battery lamp. HOA bylaws, state property code, utility compliance regulations, insurance policies, vendor contracts. Outside, thunder rumbled low across the hills while rainwater tapped softly against the windows. Around midnight, I finally found the section that made my pulse slow down instead of speed up. Article 7. Board Liability Protections. I read the paragraph 3 times to make sure exhaustion was not twisting the words around. HOA board members were legally protected only if actions were approved through documented voting procedures and performed in good faith, without personal financial interest. Without personal financial interest. The phrase sat there on the page like a loose bolt waiting to be tightened. Suddenly, I remembered something Chloe mentioned weeks earlier after basketball practice. She said she saw Linda loading solar panels into a white truck parked outside a warehouse near the interstate. At the time, I barely thought about it because Linda had spent months obsessing over my roof. But now another memory surfaced. The contractor logo on the trailer parked in my driveway that morning. Carrington Property Services. Same last name. I opened my laptop and typed slowly while rain hammered harder outside. Texas Business Registration Database. My screen loaded for a second before the search results appeared. Owner, Daniel Carrington. Registered business address linked directly to Linda Carrington's residence. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the steady hum of Chloe's medical cooler through the wall. Then I smiled for the first time since sunrise. Because Linda had spent months acting like a suburban queen controlling powerless homeowners. But if her family company profited from removing my solar system without a valid board vote, this stopped being an HOA dispute. This became self-dealing. And self-dealing destroys legal protection faster than almost anything. The next 3 days became very quiet. That was how I knew Linda was nervous. No fresh violation notices taped to my mailbox. No passive-aggressive neighborhood posts about community standards. No white Range Rover slowly circling my cul-de-sac during evening inspections. Willow Creek suddenly felt too calm, like the heavy silence right before a transformer blows during a summer overload. Meanwhile, I stopped thinking like a homeowner and started thinking like an electrical engineer. Engineers do not argue with emotions. We follow systems until something fails. Every morning before work, I sat at my kitchen table beneath battery-powered lights with stacks of documents spread around cold coffee cups and charging cables. The house still smelled faintly of generator exhaust mixed with damp attic insulation, while Chloe got ready for school beside emergency lanterns like we were living through a storm shelter drill. Outside, sunlight poured across empty roof mounts all day long, wasted energy reflecting off bare aluminum rails. I started with public records. Texas property filings, vendor registrations, HOA meeting minutes. The deeper I dug, the stranger everything became. According to official records, the board approved an emergency infrastructure enforcement action at a private executive session held the week before my panels disappeared. There was only one problem. Richard Holloway, the nervous board member from the hearing, had been in Arizona visiting his grandchildren during that exact week. Social media photos placed him standing beside the Grand Canyon wearing a tourist hat, while Linda's documents claimed he attended the vote in person. The metallic taste of adrenaline crept into my mouth again. Somebody falsified meeting records. Then I found the contractor permit filings. Or more accurately, I found the absence of them. No county electrical permit. No roof modification authorization. No utility disconnect notice filed with the state grid operator. Whoever removed my system bypassed every legal procedure required under Texas Electrical Infrastructure Code. My father used to say bad contractors always leave fingerprints in paperwork. Turns out he was right. Around midnight on Thursday, Chloe walked into my office rubbing sleep from her eyes while I stared at spreadsheets glowing across 3 monitors. "Dad," she said softly, "you have not slept in like 2 days." I looked around the room for the first time in hours. Open binders everywhere. Highlighter marks across insurance clauses. Security footage paused frame by frame on one screen, showing contractors carrying panels down ladders in the rain. The air smelled like overheated electronics from my backup battery systems, charging nonstop. "I am okay," I told her. But honestly, I was past angry now. Angry burns hot and fast. This felt colder, more precise. Then Chloe pointed at one of the paused security frames. "Wait," she said. "Zoom in on the truck door." I enlarged the image until the grainy contractor logo sharpened just enough to read. Carrington Property Services. Department Code. CPS 17. Beneath it sat a faded state contractor license number. I typed it into the Texas licensing database, expecting routine registration details. Instead, a red notice appeared across the screen. License expired 11 months ago. I leaned back slowly while rain tapped against the office window again. Unlicensed contractors. Fraudulent board records. Unauthorized electrical removal. Financial self-interest connected directly to Linda's family business. Every single discovery stripped away another layer of legal protection around the board. Then my phone buzzed against the desk. Unknown number. I answered without speaking. For a second all I heard was static and the faint hum of traffic somewhere far away. Then a nervous male voice whispered, "You need to look at the HOA insurance policy exclusions." Richard Holloway. I recognized him instantly. "Linda never told the board her brother's company would profit from the removal," he said quickly. "And Ethan, There was never a unanimous vote. The line went dead immediately after that. I sat there listening to the soft electronic hum of battery chargers filling the dark office, while lightning flashed faintly through the curtains. Then I opened the HOA insurance policy again and turned directly to liability exclusions. And right there in black letters was the sentence that changed everything. Directors are not individually protected in cases involving fraud, unauthorized property seizure, or undisclosed financial benefit. Friday morning arrived hot and windless, the kind of Texas heat that makes asphalt shimmer by 9 o'clock. My house still ran partially on generators and portable batteries while extension cords crossed the hallway like tripwires. The steady hum from backup power supplies had become background noise by then, mixed with the faint smell of fuel and overheated electronics lingering through the vents. But something inside me had changed overnight. I stopped reacting to Linda Carrington. I stopped checking neighborhood message boards. I stopped arguing with HOA emails. Instead, I built timelines. Every invoice, every timestamp, every security camera frame. Engineers solve problems by isolating failure points, and Linda had created more failure points than she realized. Around 10 in the morning, I drove downtown to the county records office carrying a binder thick enough to strain the zipper. The building smelled like printer toner, old paper, and industrial air conditioning. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, while clerks shuffled documents behind scratched plexiglass windows. 3 days earlier, I would have walked in there angry. Now I walked in calm. Calm scares people more. I filed formal requests for board communications related to emergency infrastructure enforcement actions. Then I requested contractor licensing verification records and utility disconnect authorizations tied to my property address. The clerk behind the counter glanced at my paperwork, then looked back up slowly. "You are filing against the HOA?" she asked carefully. "No," I replied. "I am filing against individuals." Her eyebrows lifted slightly after that. By lunchtime, things started moving faster than even I expected. The state electrical board confirmed no license disconnect order existed for my solar array removal. The county roofing department opened an inquiry over unauthorized structural modifications. Then my utility provider called asking why a residential solar generation system had been disconnected without grid notification compliance. Every phone conversation sounded the same after a while. Long pause. Keyboard typing. Then somebody quietly saying, "That is not supposed to happen." Meanwhile, Linda kept acting like none of this mattered. Around 3 in the afternoon, her newest neighborhood update appeared online beneath a smiling photo of Willow Creek's entrance fountain. The board remains committed to preserving the integrity and beauty of our community despite ongoing hostility from certain residents. Hostility. Like I was the problem because I objected to strangers dismantling my roof before sunrise. Chloe read the post over my shoulder while eating microwave soup heated through generator power. "She sounds nervous," she said. And for the first time, I realized she was right. Linda's posts were becoming longer, more defensive, more emotional. People only over-explain when they are losing control. That evening, another strange thing happened. My doorbell rang just after sunset. I opened the door expecting another violation notice taped to my frame. Instead, Richard Holloway stood there sweating through a pale blue polo shirt despite the evening breeze. He kept glancing over his shoulder toward the street, like somebody might see him standing there. "I cannot stay long," he whispered. His voice smelled faintly of mint gum and panic. He handed me a manila envelope thick with printed documents. Internal HOA emails, draft meeting notes, vendor invoices. I flipped through the pages beneath the porch light, while cicadas screamed from nearby trees. Then one invoice stopped me cold. Carrington Property Services billed the HOA $46,000 for emergency energy structure remediation. $46,000. Nearly double the actual value of my entire solar installation. Richard wiped sweat from his forehead with trembling fingers. "Linda told us the community insurance would cover everything if there were complaints," he said quietly. She never mentioned her brother owned the contractor company. My stomach tightened instantly, because now this was bigger than property theft. This was fraud tied directly to HOA funds. Richard looked at me with exhausted eyes. "Ethan, people are scared. If the insurance company denies protection, some of these board members could lose their homes." I looked past him toward the darkening street where porch lights flickered on across Willow Creek. Then I looked back down at the invoice in my hands. $46,000 charged to the HOA using falsified emergency authority. Suddenly, the entire thing clicked together so perfectly it almost made me laugh. Linda never expected me to investigate the money. And people who hide money usually panic when accountants start asking questions. The emergency HOA meeting started at 7 sharp on Tuesday night, and by 7:15, the entire room smelled like fear hidden beneath expensive perfume and burnt coffee. Every folding chair inside the Willow Creek clubhouse was full. Homeowners lined the back walls holding phones chest-high, pretending not to record, while whispers rolled through the room like electrical static before a storm. Outside, thunderclouds gathered over the subdivision again, turning the clubhouse windows dark blue beneath flickering parking lot lights. I walked in carrying one black binder and a laptop bag. No raised voice. No dramatic entrance. Just paperwork. Linda sat at the center table wearing another cream blazer with gold buttons, but the confidence looked thinner now. Her smile appeared too quickly whenever somebody glanced her direction. The board members beside her looked worse. Richard Holloway stared at the tabletop like he wanted to disappear into it. Another board member kept wiping sweat from his forehead with shaking fingers despite the freezing air conditioning humming overhead. The room fell silent the second Linda tapped her little wooden gavel against the table. This meeting concerns ongoing harassment and misinformation regarding recent board enforcement actions, she announced smoothly. Harassment, misinformation, same polished language, same fake calm. But this time nobody looked comfortable hearing it. I could feel the shift already. Homeowners were no longer looking at me like I was the problem. They were looking at the board. Linda began reading prepared statements about architectural compliance, while rain started ticking softly against the clubhouse windows. Then she reached for another folder and stopped mid-sentence because I stood up. The metal legs of my chair scraped sharply against the tile floor, echoing through the room. Before this continues, I said calmly, I would like clarification on whether the board disclosed financial conflicts tied to Carrington Property Services during the emergency removal vote. The silence afterward felt electric. Linda's expression froze instantly. Not anger. Panic. Tiny but real. One homeowner near the back whispered, "What is Carrington Property Services?" I opened the binder slowly while 40 people watched. The smell of paper and printer ink rose into the cold clubhouse air. $46,000 contractor invoice, I said evenly, sliding copies across the table. Issued by a company owned by Linda Carrington's brother for unauthorized removal of my solar system without licensed permits or utility approval. A few gasps rippled through the room immediately. One board member actually leaned back in his chair like somebody shoved him. Linda recovered fast, though. She straightened her blazer and forced a smile. These accusations are completely inappropriate and legally baseless. That was when I connected my laptop to the clubhouse projector. Security footage filled the wall behind her. Rain falling. Contractors removing panels from my roof before sunrise. Linda is standing beneath an umbrella directing the work personally. Timestamp glowing bright in the corner. The room went dead quiet except for the low buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Then I displayed the contractor license status. Expired 11 months ago. Somebody near the back muttered, "Oh my God." Linda's face drained pale beneath the projector glow. One of the board members turned toward her sharply. "You told us everything was approved," he snapped. Another grabbed the insurance policy copies sitting in front of him and flipped pages frantically. I watched the exact moment they found the exclusion clause. Fraud. Unauthorized property seizure. Undisclosed financial benefit. No individual liability protection. Richard looked physically sick. Linda tried speaking again, but nobody listened anymore. Questions exploded across the room all at once. You said insurance covered this. Was there even a legal vote? Can homeowners sue us personally? Then the best sound of the entire night finally arrived. Not yelling. Not outrage. Phones ringing. One after another. Board members checking messages from spouses, attorneys, insurance agents. The soft vibration of panic spreading across polished conference tables. I stood there beneath the projector light watching the entire structure Linda built start collapsing under the weight of its own paperwork. And for the first time since they touched my roof, she looked exactly like what she really was. Not a powerful HOA president. Just a woman who thought nobody would ever read the fine print. 3 months later, the neighborhood looked completely different. Funny how fast suburban perfection falls apart once the paperwork starts talking. The Willow Creek HOA clubhouse sat dark and locked behind temporary county notices while legal disputes crawled through courtrooms downtown. Half the decorative entrance lights no longer worked because the HOA maintenance contracts got frozen during the financial investigation. Even the fountain at the subdivision entrance had stopped running, leaving behind nothing but stagnant water and dead leaves drifting across cracked concrete. Every morning I drove past it on my way to work while sunlight rolled across brand-new solar panels covering my roof again. Bigger system this time. 42 panels instead of 24. Full battery wall installed inside the garage. Triple redundancy backup. Quiet. Efficient. Untouchable. The soft inverter hum had returned to the house like a heartbeat finally settling back into rhythm. That sound filled the hallways every evening now, while Chloe did homework at the kitchen counter beneath warm lights powered entirely by our own roof. The first night the new system came online, she stood in the driveway staring up at the panels glowing orange beneath sunset reflections. "Grandpa would have loved this," she whispered. I looked up at the roofline, while warm summer wind carried the smell of fresh-cut grass through the neighborhood. "Yeah," I said quietly. "He would have." Linda Carrington disappeared from Willow Creek almost overnight after the insurance company officially denied liability protection for the board. Once investigators confirmed the contractor conflict and falsified meeting records, the lawsuits spread fast. Individual claims, fraud inquiries, breach of fiduciary duty filings. Turns out suburban confidence evaporates quickly when attorneys start naming people personally instead of hiding behind HOA logos. Richard Holloway resigned first. Then 2 other board members followed within a week. Homeowners demanded emergency elections while county investigators audited financial records tied to vendor payments. Nobody smiled at HOA meetings anymore after that. The strangest part was how quiet Linda became. No more neighborhood announcements. No more carefully worded social media posts about standards and harmony. The last time I saw her, she stood outside her white Range Rover while movers carried boxes from her garage into a rental truck. No makeup, no cream blazer, no clipboard, just silence. She looked smaller somehow standing there beneath the brutal August sun while cicadas screamed from the trees around the cul-de-sac. For a second our eyes met across the street. I expected anger, maybe another threat. Instead she just looked tired, like somebody who finally understood that paperwork leaves permanent fingerprints. She climbed into the SUV without saying a word and drove away slowly past the same houses she spent years controlling. 2 weeks later, Chloe and I sat at the dining room table during the biggest storm of the summer. Lightning cracked across the hills outside Willow Creek while thunder shook the windows hard enough to rattle picture frames. One by one, houses across the neighborhood went dark. Air conditioners died. Porch lights vanished. The entire subdivision faded into blackout silence beneath heavy rain. But inside our house, the lights never even flickered. The battery wall purred softly from the garage, while warm kitchen light reflected across polished countertops. Chloe stirred soup on the stove while music played quietly through ceiling speakers powered entirely by stored sunlight. I walked over to the window and looked out across the dark neighborhood. In the distance, I could barely make out the dead HOA fountain sitting motionless beside the entrance sign. Then my eyes drifted upward toward the roof where rainwater rolled across 42 solar panels collecting energy even in the middle of a storm. My father used to say electricity follows the path built for it. Same thing with consequences. People like Linda think power belongs to whoever talks the loudest in the room. But real power is quieter than that. Real power lives in documents, in patience, in knowing exactly when to stop arguing and start recording. And standing there in that warm kitchen while the rest of Willow Creek sat powerless in the dark, I finally understood something simple. The funny thing about sunlight is the harder people try to control it, the more expensive the darkness becomes.